we can do that.
The lady says recording in progress.
There you go. And that way I won't forget. I did that once before. We don't want to do that again. You can turn it on or off as far as live transcriptioning goes. So it has been enabled. You can change the view by clicking on the view button in the upper right-hand corner of your screen if you want to change how your screen looks. We recommend the speaker view. It's the best because we get to look at the wonderful speaker. At the close of the presentation, I will be putting an assessment survey in the chat box. Please fill out the survey for each session you attend today. We appreciate you helping us out with that. Now I'm going to turn it over to our speaker to introduce themselves and start their presentation. Take it away, guys.
Hello. Welcome to Leveraging Open Source Tools for DSpace, an adventure in optimizing and workflows. My name is Patrick Deepin. I'm the archivist for West Texas A&M University's Cornette Library. My associate will introduce himself here in a moment. Let's see. The big part of this is if you know you're a person that does the repository stuff, then this is most likely, you've probably already heard from them about some of this. So go ahead, Bruce.
Okay, I'm Bruce Wardlow. I'm the Open Educational Resources Librarian here at West Texas A&M. And one of the things that it's important to note in this presentation is that neither myself nor Patrick are programmers or professional IT people. We are people that have kind of had this thrust upon us that are hobbyists.
Yes. Both of us come from no very little professional background in anything computers. It's mostly one of the good things about open source is that you can learn how to do it relatively easily. I've gone from zero Python knowledge to being able to break things and unbreak them in a matter of months. And I think that by the time this is over, you should feel like you can too, because we've kind of stumbled through this and we're finding some great success even while stumbling. So let's see, let's go ahead and go on to the next. So I have some QR codes throughout this. Babette will be putting them in the chat for you to follow along. If you want to try the program, what you want to do is you want to use you want to look for in the site version here. Not that. Oh, that's inconvenient. You want this one because this is the one that will run on anything. You will not need a Python environment. This one has its limitations, as we will go over here in a moment. And here is more QR codes. So this is our actual institutional repository here on the left. And on the right is an info guide that I use to guide people through the repository, as it's not very visual friendly. Let's see.
Okay, so what we're going to do is we are going to talk about a problem that we ran into in uploading bulk uploads to our DSpace repository. And sort of how we change, what we're going to talk about is how we changed our workflow and came up with some tools to accommodate that. So we're going to talk about why we chose this particular route. We're going to talk about some of the fundamental things that we needed to do. We're going to talk about some problems we ran into and how we solved some of those problems. Then we're going to talk about some stuff. Just give you all an opportunity to provide feedback. Patrick, you're muted.
Got it. I hit the wrong button. So normally, you get your items through an institutional repository given to you piecemeal. So I would be uploading, say, a digitized copy of a book here or an OER here. But in my case, as we are also the University Archives digital repository, our digitizing projects also have to be uploaded to the repository. And that would mean going through the process of uploading to a DSpace repository potentially 700 times a week. And that in older versions of DSpace, that was 5 pages, 5 web pages of data to fill out, which meant that macros were not going to be very helpful. And so there is a helpful tool built into DSpace automatically called import and export, where you can upload your files in a simple archive format, and it will automatically put them where they belong. It's built in. There are already tools that exist for it, but none that we can use here at our institution. The one that is most prevalently used is Java-based, and we don't have any way of running Java-based programs on our computers at our current institution. Let's see. So individual uploading, this one, the Java version required the single Mac computer that did have it, and it is not here anymore. That belonged to my predecessor, who was OER librarian and running the institutional repository. Let's see. So let me see. Well, the process as it stood before getting any of this going was I had to have my metadata sheets open, and I had to have the repository open, and I had to copy over all of the information, which was up to 28 fields of information, one by one, in order to upload a single file. When I timed it, it took nearly exactly the same amount of time to digitize an entire issue of a newspaper as it did to upload it to the repository, essentially doubling the length of the preservation process. Another problem with doing it that way is if you do these in large enough batches where, say, you sit down for 4 hours and upload, you're going to make mistakes. You're going to be staring at spreadsheets for 4 hours, and you're eventually going to start not noticing errors in data that you might have noticed previously. That's something that as we've done this series of presentations on the repository, because we did one a couple of weeks ago, I'm moving more into this idea that data blindness is a big problem for uploading in large batches like this, where if you don't know what the term data blindness is, if you've ever been writing something or reading something, and eventually the words start to look like they're not spelled correctly, and you know they're spelled correctly, but they're looking like they're not, that's essentially your brain getting tired of looking at whatever you're looking at. There we go. Let's see.
Yes,
okay,
so
okay.
this is sort of the problem we ran into when trying to create some bulk uploaders. There's a couple of different pre-written ones out there. Some of them didn't work. Some of them worked, but didn't have sufficient documentation for us to be able to actually find what the problems were. And then the second problem we ran into, and this is the problem we ran into with the most prevalent version, is that IT just wouldn't let us install the requisite software. So in this entire process, there is a whole bunch of guessing and trying that we ran into. So basically, it's the workflow that was originally handed down to Patrick no longer was viable. So we had to adjust. Okay.
I got it. One of the first things I did when I was given responsibility to manage the day-to-day operations of the repository, because I'm an archivist, so I'm going to run it slightly differently than a library, like a cataloging librarian might. So I created a new collection policy, a policy that it is run more like an archive than a library. It has different accessioning policies, different de-accessioning policies. There's no weeding on an archives repository because it's all there for, as far as we're concerned, in perpetuity. Let's see. So that's a little bit different than the way it was run before. where there were very few things that actually went on the institutional repository. It was the ETDs, the electronic theses and dissertations, that went on there, and not super much else. There was some other faculty research, but it needed to grow. There was one or two museum projects on there as well. But I decided that if we were going to expand the repository, which is something that I've been tasked with doing, then I need to clearly define what belongs in this repository. And so I split that up into what I call the 4 pillars, which is university archives, which is our own department, where it's university history, it's the museum's digital collections, it's library and course resources, where I have a couple of OERs that Bruce needs to host there, the theses and dissertations, and now the scholarly deliveries, because we have the EDD program. Public history, we don't have a ton of public history. What we do has been exceptionally popular. We have a library genealogy page that's on there that is local genealogy, and that one video from that collection outweighs the access of most other items. It's a video of an interview of a bunch of elders from the area, and for whatever reason, that one has thousands more views than others. And then faculty and staff publications. So this is going to end up being like our faculty poster sessions, and then later our student poster sessions. All of these are expanding. Like the university archives one is now going to include not just the PPHM, but now is also going to have more Seesaw stuff, which is the Center for the Study of the American West. They do oral histories and local research, local historical research grants. It's actually a very interesting organization. We're going to hopefully have some more OER on there eventually. And then for faculty and staff publications, that's going to expand into also student publications, because we are increasingly having students doing poster sessions. And so those are going to go up here pretty soon. Here comes the challenges with working with CSVs. If you don't know what a CSV is, it is a comma delineated Excel file, basically, that you'll have the top row, which is the Dublin core metadata field that you need to fill out. And this is what the repository will read. And you need to have under it the file name, file, and then the requisite metadata that you want to appear in the repository. Because essentially what the program does, what the batch uploader does, is it just reads these down and says, okay, this one is from this date by this publisher by this, and this. Problem with doing that is that Excel doesn't like you. So there are little things you have to do to get Excel to properly read CSVs. Like, say, for example, changing your entire computer language from American English to British English so that it won't change your date formats, because Dublin Core only accepts one date format, which is year, month, day. Implementing a 3-2-1 backup. There was not a backup that I could find of everything that was on the repository up to that point. So I went through the process of downloading all of that, making several copies, and moving and having one that I've placed offsite. Let me see. Mitigation of data blindness is something that's taken a little bit of trial and error. The way I've split this up is I do have student workers, and during the process of scanning, because I don't do all the scanning, they write the metadata as they go. So as they're scanning it, they'll make sure to put everything in the fields, one file by one file, so that I don't have to both write and verify. I liken this much to cache handling procedures, where the person who is supposed to be accepting the money is not also the one who verifies it down the line. because that's prone to errors. Let's see. I sat down and watched one of my student workers scan for a little bit, because watching yourself scan is kind of impossible. And tried to figure out where dead time was to fill with other projects, or with filling out metadata sheets, or going back and double checking things, making sure files are still there. Using that time to clean the equipment, using that time for, I guess, self-care. I encourage them to, while the computers are rendering, because it takes several minutes to render each scan, to go ahead and just go walk for a moment, because if you don't have anything to do at that exact moment, then go ahead. Okay, and Bruce is going to talk about the fundamentals of a simple archive format file.
Okay, so can you advance the slide, please? Okay, so the way this works is I am involved in this project largely on a very technical side. Most of this is done by Patrick and his team. However, one of the things we ran into is that DSpace itself does not have its own bulk upload. Well, it has the bulk upload tool, but it does not have its own tool to actually compile all of those files. In this case, we were using it primarily to upload a series of scans of the student newspaper called the Prairie. And basically, what we needed a tool to do, since we were unable to use the ones that were out there already, is to make a folder for each item, put the item in the folder, create an XML file with all of the metadata, primarily Dublin Core, put that XML file into the folder, and create a text file that has the inventory of everything in that record and the license, put that text file into that folder, and then zip the entire folder together. So the actual process of creating a SAF file, it's simple like archive format, is really quite simple. And so this is what we needed a tool to do. Okay, next slide, please. So what does that actually look like? Well, we have a zipped output folder here. In that, we have two items, or rather two records, and we've got the buffalo grazing in the meadow and mother and child, which is another example photo of a buffalo. And then within each one of those folders, there is an item, there is an XML file titled Dublin Core, because that's what DSpace wants. And then there is a contents file that actually says what items are actually in that record. This is the this is the contents of the file that was described in the last slide. So yes, we've got buffalo grazing in meadow, which is the actual JPEG in the top left there. And then in the top right, you have the contents file, which on ours, we were not originally going to put a license with it. However, we are looking at changing that. And so really all the contents file has is all of the items in that record. And then we have an XML file that has all of the Dublin Core information. So originally, when we were trying to see what we could do to change the workflow, because what Patrick was doing at the beginning of this was he would have 4 tabs open, and in each tab, he would be going through sequentially and putting in all of the information. And I believe he got frustrated at one point and came and talked to me and tried to figure out if I knew anything about it. And so I tried a couple of tools. We ran into some problems, and I kind of got frustrated and said, you know what, I can just write this. It's not that complex of a process. And so originally, to get just a Python script that does everything took me about 4 hours, referencing some other information and a lot of documentation. It's 222 lines, including comments and spaces. Realistically, I could probably get that down to about half that. There was no validation and there was no GUI, no guided user interface. So it was purely operating in text, which was kind of inconvenient if you weren't the person that wrote that script. So next slide, please. So how did we develop things? Well, the first thing we actually put in was error messages because we were prone to the data blindness as mentioned above. And by the time it got to me, I was the third person looking at that data, and we still had issues. Sometimes the issue was with some formatting problems, like with the Excel error that was mentioned earlier. Sometimes what we ran into was just um, a naming issue. Someone might have forgotten the space in one of the names, or it was giving us all kinds of error issues. So ultimately, the first thing we added to it were error messages. And that simplified a lot of our process, and it allowed Patrick to have feedback to further refine what he was having his student workers doing, because, you know, we were seeing here are the errors that are popping up, and we can identify each one specifically. The next thing we added in was validation. Validation simply means there's something that checks it, makes sure there aren't going to be any errors probably, and it would prevent you from actually running the thing, because in its early days it was a little bit manual in the reset. And so we added validation. So now the tool actually will tell you, yes, I am willing to use this metadata CSV, or no, I am not. And then finally, we added an actual graphics user interface to it. We made it pretty. And this GUI is actually quite customizable.
One of the better things that the error messages did down the line that I didn't know it was going to do was that I kept track of which errors we ran into more often and traced those backwards in the workflow to see what exactly was causing those. And the short version of it was that, especially with some of the delineators, it turned out it was Excel changing some of the delineators that my student worker was putting into the into one of our fields requires delineators between subject fields, and for whatever reason, it would be one way when my student worker opens it, but when I open it, mine reformats that delineator for reasons that are beyond me. So
Okay, so the state of the tool now
yes.
is we have two different versions. We have, well, we call it the HTML version because it's an HTML file. However, what it actually uses, it uses a tool called PyDie to create a browser-side Python environment in which to run. So that one, you don't need any additional software for. It runs in your browser. However, because it does run in your browser, it's not super stable. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with it, the simple archive format, or rather DSpace, has a limit of 2 gigs per bulk upload file. And that, for us, is roughly a year's worth of newspapers. And as we go through that year's worth of newspapers, we figured out that the HTML version didn't require installation. However, it didn't eat a full year's of newspapers. But what I'm hoping with this one is to further refine it and try to get it a little bit more stable. But if its existence is just to help you justify getting the actual Python environment installed through your IT, then that's a perfectly valid use of it. We also have the Python version, which is the actual tool we have been using for about the last 6 months. It does run in a Python environment. I use Anaconda 3, just my preference. So runs in Python environment, additional software needed. Stable beyond the 2 gigabyte limit on SAF files. Yeah, it's as stable as it wants. James says that I think the 2 GB file upload size limit is in the Tomcat server configuration. Sysadmins can change it. That is something that we've gotten feedback from other universities and other people that use it that they'd like to do it, which is one of the reasons this specific tool doesn't actually check the size. That's something that we still do manually.
Yes. SAF files can realistically be as large as you want them to be. They're just a normal zip file that just happens to have instructions in it. So.
Okay, next slide, please. So,
Okay. Go ahead.
just go ahead.
Okay, we have a number of discussion questions that we've included along with this that we've updated throughout us presenting this at more than one place. So what features would you desire in this tool? Those of you that might use it, those of you that might not, but think, oh, that would be a neat feature.
Yeah, so on this one, it's a project that I get to work on about 3 hours a month, if that. So it's still fairly basic. However, we are kind of curious to see if what features people might use in something like this. And don't worry, we'll get a little bit more general in a minute.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, do we want to go ahead and move on then, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
We can.
This is an opinion one of what do you think would be the better approach for this? Because there is the HTML version, which is it's very simple, but limited. But the Python one is more complex, harder to use, but it fits more solutions. So what approach does everyone think is better? Should we make something for the little amount of time that we do have working on this? Do we make something that is more complicated but fits everyone's needs, or simpler and will fit kind of most people's needs?
So this one you can even take on a more deep philosophical question. Within libraries, we have a whole lot of things that don't seem quite to work perfectly for everyone, but works okay for most people. Whereas we look at some of the big universities like big A&M and we say, you know, we wish we could do some of the stuff you've got and actually make a lot of these custom solutions. So which one do you think is better? A complex one-size-fits-most solution, or something that your hobbyists can actually sit there and change and make custom to fit perfectly with your university's needs?
We have one saying simple. Thank you, Tiana. You know, we've asked that question at a previous conference as well, and yes. Thank you, James. Thank you, Annie. The second option is preferable. Simple, yes. But that's also a question that I don't know if is this question later in the presentation, Bruce, where we ask, is this really does this really fit within a librarian's job to go out and learn a programming language to fix a tool?
Yes, it's the next question, actually.
Okay, good.
But yeah, let's see. James says it really depends on the user.
Yeah.
Absolutely, that's perfectly fair. And I think Annie says, if time allows, the second option is preferable. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's
in my case, it's not like doing it this way with the batch uploader is a 100% necessity. I could still upload them manually. It's not as if I would lose anything by this not existing, other than actual hours and hours of time. Yes. Yeah, I agree, Annie, that these have each approach has its own thing, which is kind of why there's two. But we may need to prioritize doing one or the other.
So this gives us the third question. So in some of the smaller libraries, librarians are asked to wear many, many hats. And well, the question is, should being the library's programmer be one of the hats the librarian should be wearing? Instead, should the library be trying to seek out other options outside of the library with this? James says you have to make do with what you have, which is 100% accurate, and the reason we're doing this.
I feel like that could have been an alternative title for this presentation.
Mhm.
Okay. Very seen to understand what we. Oh, okay. People were just typing.
Okay.
You're free to unmute if you want to answer that way for these questions. You know, that's what we do in my experience. Yes. Is it also in the library and archivist unless IT is able to help? I'd agree, Lori. It's just that I don't actually think we have a structure here in which to do that. A lot of the things that we end up doing here in the library, we have to do mostly our own.
I find the same thing too.
Okay.
Once in a while, IT can help, but generally, I agree. It ends up falling on our shoulders to do it and learn it.
Okay, we've got, let's see, just reading out some of the comments for the for the sake of the recording. We've got folks outside the libraries rarely seem to understand what we need, in my experience. That's a pretty fair assessment. I think that's how a lot of our tools end up. We've got my personal experience, that is, it falls with the librarian archivist unless IT is able to help, time and expertise. That's pretty fair. It's one of the reasons many of us are jealous of some of these bigger universities where IT and libraries are bundled together. We've got, but if your job begins to require coding, you need support from the IT department. They can make or break any coding project. That is
Yes.
100% fair. It's kind of the reason we ended up on our path. Next response is, I think it depends. If the library is willing to provide compensated time, then yes, but it is a larger labor question. That is, I agree, that is a larger labor question, but I'm also, yeah,
we can always just go with the this feels like other duties as assigned, and then just or as we've assigned ourselves, I guess, because this is if we're making it sound like this has been a difficult or arduous process, we're doing this voluntarily.
This is my fun project. This is what I do for fun. Yes, I'm a nerd. We've got, it really depends on the job title / description, but generally, if you weren't hired to do coding, then this is going above and beyond. I do certainly agree.
Yes.
But I feel like, well, as librarians, one of the things that we are often asked to do is do what it takes to make everything work. And I feel like, well, at least under the current, this goes back to the larger labor question. Under the current sort of librarian philosophy, at least the one I follow, is above and beyond seems to be what we strive for and is our standard. That's just my opinion, though. But those were some really, really excellent comments.
Yeah. Thank you all. This is I like reading through these and seeing that people seem to get why we're doing this, especially well, I don't know if I don't know if I said the amount of time, but so it takes from the moment I have my CSV file, assuming there's no errors, to creating the SAF file to uploading into DSpace takes about 15 minutes. Doing it manually can take an hour and a half for the same amount of files. So it's fundamentally a time-saving thing on my end. So there we go. Does anybody have any questions for either of us?
Before that, real quick, we've got one more comment.
Yes.
I have been guilty of above and beyond too, but realize the downside as far as work-life balance. That's absolutely a fair statement. Yes, I come from K-12, so
well, and it comes to also with this with doing workflows the way that I had been doing it previously was doing all of this manually is significantly more mentally taxing. Simply because it takes, if I were to upload, say, everything that I have in my queue right now, it would probably take me 16 hours to do so. So if I sat down and did it straight through, that's 2 straight days of staring at a screen, verifying data that realistically there's already a tool out here for. It's just I don't have the tools within my own head to make the program work. So yeah, if I could go back in time 7 months, I might, but that's part of this process is that, and one of the things that I want to make sure that before we get to the questions I impart upon this is that you can do stuff like this too if you need to. Thankfully, the open source community is very helpful. When we presented this at a previous conference, we had half a dozen of my counterparts, repository managers at other universities, come up and say, "This is neat. Thank you for doing this. And also, I want to talk to you about what you're doing correctly or incorrectly." And also getting to meet some of the people who've made other programs similar to ours. One of whom's present, but yes.
Yes, we've got automate repetitive tasks.
It is above and beyond that actually enhances your work-life balance. Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so now open to questions. Does anyone have any questions for Bruce or I? Or at this point, you can go ahead and just unmute if you feel like it, because we're done with the bulk of our presentation here. So.
Hey, fellas, thanks for providing some more background on the development and operation of this software. I'm glad you all are having success growing repository collections. And I do very much also like the 4 pillars that y'all came up with for the for like a collections policy. That's I think that's crucial for the development of a repository, and it's good to have that kind of early in the growth. Mm-hmm. You need to be intentional about the growth of a repository. Yes. It'll get out of hand. On the matter of the spreadsheets, the CSV comma separated value files, what software are you using to manage those spreadsheets and to create them? Are you using Microsoft Excel or other software?
I'm using Excel. Excel is what I have access to. I have not found a successful way of using Sheets with a work account, because Sheets won't do this where it'll change your values. But Sheets also has limited equations. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in Excel, if you open a CSV, it is going do you a lot of favors that you don't want. It'll reformat dates and do crazy stuff. And yeah. So there is a way around it, but it's tricky. Instead of opening the files or double clicking, you have to go into Excel and use the import dialog. So there's, depending on the version of Excel, at the top menus, there's like something where you can say import data, and then you can pick the CSV, and then you can tell it not to reformat columns. So it's far less convenient. It's about 12 times as many clicks to get the stuff in there. But just so you're aware, it is possible to use Excel without Excel mangling the data.
You see, I use Excel a lot, and I had no idea. Like,
yeah, well, feel free to follow up with me. I'm happy to answer any questions y'all might have.
Cool. Thankfully, I already have your email. So, yeah. All right. Well, thank you.
Yeah,
The
you
question
talk about your
the,
tool. I want to see this succeed, and I want other people to use it.
Right.
If they're not able to use other tools that are in the toolkit.
So
when
that
I
brings
was,
up
oh, go ahead, Bruce.
sorry, that brings up a question. I was using CSVs purely because, well, I was using pandas to do a lot of this, which is intended more for data science and using large volumes of data. Would it be, in some of your opinion, more useful to make it importable as an Excel spreadsheet and just skip the whole CSV problem? Because that can be done, I just don't like doing it. Interesting. I may need to explore that.
It's not something I'd recommend.
Okay.
CSVs can be hard to work with, but I think they're the least bad option, because I think a library, like an open source library to process Excel, yeah, well, yeah, maybe it's not that bad. But then also it locks you into Excel, and you couldn't use a text editor to view the CSVs.
Interesting.
Oh, okay.
Anyway,
that is a valid point. I hadn't thought about that.
Right. I do one part of the steps of the HTML tool is that there is actually an editable field where you can correct some data mistakes. It's just not, the window's not very big.
Yeah,
So,
it's also in the demo version, which is the current publicly accessible version.
yes.
I don't think I have it set up to do that. That is something that, well, it's a parity issue.
Yeah.
The specific set of tools that I'm using to make the browser version work, I wasn't able to keep that feature.
Okay. Oh, I was going to say, I've mostly been working on whatever the cutting edge thing that Bruce is doing. So if I happen to say something that it's like, oh, Bruce has removed that, or that doesn't work properly. Oh, it's because I'm probably doing something to make it work and not saying anything. Let's see. What was it? I'm just going to address the 4 pillars thing real quick before I forget what I was going to say. That 4 pillars of the repository thing was part of the new collection policy that I implemented when I got charge of it. And my general philosophy with policies like that is that I wanted to construct it in a way that myself and the people who will succeed me eventually, because I'm not immortal, will have a structure with which to prevent people in the future from waving their fist and screaming their name. Like, why would you do it this way? So, all right. Let's see. Do we have any other questions from the chat that came through?
I haven't seen anything else.
Okay.
I have put the link for the survey in, and if everybody would take a moment, please, to fill that out, we'd really appreciate your feedback on the presentation today.
Well, thank you all for coming. Thank you all for watching our short little presentation here.
Yes. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you, gentlemen. It was wonderful.
Yes.
And we'll see everybody at the next one.
Yes. Okay. Oh, good. Oh, good. Let's go ahead and head out. Let's see. Oh, so the recording's still going?
Yeah, just in case anybody came in at the last second.
Okay.
Okay,
Oh,
I
there
will.
goes everyone.